This cheating wife! How dare you lie about this child being my grandchild? This is not my grandchild at all. Originally, the daughter, who did not resemble my husband, became even more unlike him as she turned 3. The mother-in-law found this strange and seems to have secretly conducted a DNA test between M husband and my daughter. She showed me the results with a triumphant look on her face. Now I can formally kick you out. Not only did you fail to produce a male heir, but you also tried to pass off a child from another man as our grandchild. You good for nothing. Get out. While listening to my mother-in-law's passionate speech, I was confused, tilting my head. Let's calm down, Mom. After all, this child isn't my daughter, you know. I showed her the evidence that proved it. Then, she trembled. I thought she would admit her fault at this point, but she twisted the story to her convenience. My dream has always been to become a mother surrounded by many children. When I was about elementary school age, there were other kids who wanted to be mothers, but as we went on to middle and high school, those dreams turned to careers or extended hobbies. Yet, my dream remained to have a family surrounded by lots of children. You like kids so much, why not become a kindergarten teacher, a college friend once suggested. Nowadays, it seems like women are the only ones drawing the short straw by getting married, having children, and entering into domestic life. Going through college, job hunting to get a good job, and building a career, but it all seems wasted if you get married and pregnant. While accepting the opinions of those around me, my desire to have and raise children was stronger than my desire for a career. By my junior year of college, I was desperately job hunting and graduated with a job offer from a decent company. Once employed, I realized how naive I had been during my student days, facing the harsh realities of the working world every day. 3 years into my job, a personnel change took me to a different branch where I met my husband. He was like a mentor to me, spending a lot of time working together. From there, our relationship gradually became more personal. The common ground was our love for children. My husband was considered handsome by general standards, attracting the attention of young female employees at the branch. However, no one made a move because they all assumed a guy that handsome must have a girlfriend. That misconception prevented anyone from approaching him. Eventually, it became known that we were dating, and quite a few female employees lamented, if only I had known he was available, I would have made a move. After a relationship of about 2 years, we began to think about marriage. I'm also in my late 20s, wanting at least 3 kids. Therefore, I thought marriage was now or never, and things moved swiftly from there. My husband and I wanted children and underwent tests for hereditary diseases. In fact, I have a much younger brother who inherited our father's allergies. It's just a predisposition to allergies, so he ended up with different ones from our dad, and had a hard time as a child. I was tested for allergies too, but, despite having the same father, I didn't inherit them. Having seen my brother struggle, I didn't want our children to go through the same. However, the results were unexpected. Neither my husband nor I had hereditary allergies, but it turned out my husband was infertile. Being perfectly healthy and capable of having children myself, I was honestly devastated when I found out I couldn't have children with my husband. It would have been easier to accept if the roles were reversed. My husband felt guilty, saying I should leave him as he couldn't fulfill my dream of having a family. But I'm not of the age to be chasing dreams. Dreams are dreams, reality is reality. I chose a life with my husband over a family with children. He's the only one for me in this world, and I couldn't see a future with anyone else but him. So, we got married, set up a new home, and started our new life together. My father-in-law was kind and was happy to finally have a daughter as he had always wanted one. However, my mother-in-law was not so welcoming. I was prepared for some conflict with her, but I realized I had underestimated the situation. She would come to our new home when my husband was away and start saying how she wanted to see her grandchildren. From wanting to see her grandchildren, she moved on to berating me for not producing an heir, saying, "What kind of daughter-in-law are you if you can't bear children?" She would even nitpick on my housekeeping, finding fault where there was none, just because I was not pregnant. To top it off, she blamed my inadequacy as a wife on the ridiculous idea of women advancing in society, and even told me to write my resignation. The stress turned into fear of my mother-in-law. My heart rate would soar, and I'd start hyperventilating. I opened up to my husband about everything, but I couldn't properly explain myself because just remembering what she said and did made me tremble. My husband didn't take it as seriously. It's okay to say that we should keep our distance or not come over when my husband is not around. However, when my husband found out that I was being asked to show my grandchild's face, he started saying he didn't want it known that he was infertile because it's annoying to have people come over to him too. I think it would all settle down if he just told them that. Generally, my husband is a very kind and good man. He might still feel a sense of guilt for not being able to give me the children he loves. Raised by such a mother-in-law, he might have been brought up with the belief that only by having a son can one properly carry on the family legacy. I've heard that his father's side of the family comes from a line of wealthy people. Thinking about the heavy responsibility he carries and the pain of not being able to fulfill it, I couldn't bring myself to push back any harder. Reluctantly, I kept my distance from my mother-in-law as much as possible and avoided seeing her when my husband was not around. During this time, I developed a patch of alopecia about the size of a dime, but then my husband's transfer was confirmed. By marrying my husband, I had been moved to a different department. He said I don't need to follow him to the ends of the earth, but staying in that house meant continuing my relationship with my mother-in-law. I couldn't bear that, so I resigned and decided to follow my husband on his transfer. The place we moved to still had a lot of undeveloped land, and the people were generous and easy to get along with. Best of all, we were quite far from my in-laws, so there was no way my mother-in-law would come just to nag at me. That alone reduced my stress, and my alopecia improved. The air and food were delicious, and I felt like I had gained a bit of weight, but I felt very fulfilled living my own life. Once I got used to the new environment, I started a new job. It was only part-time since I didn't have any qualifications, but working in after-school care felt like a calling for me, someone who had longed for children but couldn't have them. In fact, I had acquired a childcare qualification in college. It's not to become a childcare worker, but because I thought it would be useful for parenting. It seems that qualifications are not required to work in after-school care, but the program in my area was very well organized, and the treatment differed depending on whether you had qualifications. Once they found out I had a childcare qualification, they said I was eligible to take a special certification for after-school care, so they suggested I try for it. After discussing it with my husband, who thought it was a good idea and supported my newfound sense of purpose, I went ahead. After attending courses and such, a little over a year had passed. The area where we live has very comprehensive child welfare services. There are various supports available, and we were able to welcome a new baby girl into our family. My husband was overjoyed, calling it a miracle. I also think that if I hadn't been doing this job, I wouldn't have had this encounter. Perhaps God gave us these trials so we could meet our daughter. My husband immediately reported to his parents. Seeing my husband talk with such high spirits and apparent joy, I think I might have seen him like this for the first time. However, at this time, either due to my husband's poor explanation or my mother-in-law's lack of understanding, the situation took a dreadful turn. When our daughter turned 2 years old, my husband was transferred again, and we had to move back to the region where his parents lived. My husband got promoted and returned to the branch he was previously at. My in-laws were eager to see our daughter, and we started visiting them more frequently. With my husband's promotion, he had more subordinates and wasn't away from home as much, so there was always someone at the in-laws' house, and I thought my mother-in-law's bullying wouldn't be an issue. The long-awaited granddaughter was cherished greatly by my mother-in-law. However, her happiness did not last long. When are we getting a male heir? Don't act all high and mighty just because you've given birth to one grandchild. I don't remember doing anything to upset my mother-in-law. But it seems I'm still an unwelcome presence to her. What's with keeping the pregnancy a secret and only announcing the birth? Was there something shameful? Normally, you'd announce a pregnancy first, right? She berated me as an unreasonable daughter-in-law. This was supposed to have been explained by my husband. I took it that she knew yet chose to say it on purpose. Gradually, my mother-in-law's complaints extended to my daughter. They say a daughter takes after her father, but my granddaughter doesn't resemble my son at all. It's natural they don't look alike, but she started saying it on purpose. Not only did she tell me this, but when my daughter tried to approach her with grandma, she would say, "Don't come over here with your dirty hands," pushing her away as if she were something filthy. Even during meals at the in-laws, if my daughter didn't eat neatly and spilled her food, she was scolded for not having good manners and had the back of her hand slapped repeatedly. "I'm sorry, I'll make sure to discipline her properly later, please forgive her." When I defended my daughter, my mother-in-law would hit my head several times, saying that's why she's spoiled. By the way, if my father-in-law or husband were there, she wouldn't dare to behave so horribly towards me or my daughter. My daughter started saying "Grandma," scary, and grew distant from my mother-in-law. Then, she started calling my daughter a charmless grandchild. My father-in-law, as always, was very fond of her, and my daughter grew very attached to him. Every time we visited the in-laws, my mother-in-law would nag about whether there were signs of pregnancy yet, urging me to quickly produce a male heir. As I didn't get pregnant, she started suggesting potential brides to my husband. "How about this girl? She looks like she could have easy births and many children. This type seems more likely to have boys." My husband was called to his parents' house alone, and every time he came back, he would say that's what his mother had suggested. At first, it seemed like some kind of joke, and I thought I was just ignoring it. But after being told the same thing over and over, my husband came to me wondering, could there be a misunderstanding? Taking that into consideration, I confess that since we've been back, my mother-in-law has been annoyingly insistent about me having a boy. Moreover, she has been very cold because our daughter doesn't look like her father, and what she calls discipline is more like corporal punishment. I also told him that our daughter is scared of her grandmother. After all, my mother-in-law's attitude hasn't changed since we got married. In fact, I feel like it's gotten worse. Her treatment of my daughter, especially, is so blatant that it's chilling to think what she might have done when I'm not around. My husband seems to have realized just how painful it was to be constantly nagged by his mother to have a son. He apologized for saying we should just keep our distance, admitting he was wrong and asking for my forgiveness, though belatedly. There are pains you can't understand until you experience them. I told him it's okay. And we discussed what we should do next. As a result, my daughter and I decided to avoid going to my in-laws as much as possible and not to meet my mother-in-law face to face. Instead, my husband continued to make appearances at his parents' house whenever called by my mother-in-law. While it's an unbearable humiliation, he initially didn't think of divorcing me and mentioned waiting for the right moment to clarify things. But every time, he came back saying there wasn't a good time today. I knew he had no intention of divorcing and remarrying, and I thought it was better for him to handle my mother-in-law than for me to take action. So, I wasn't worried about him visiting his parents every time he was called, but unexpectedly, things turned in my mother-in-law's favor. Until now, the candidates for remarriage she introduced were only shown to him in photos. But this time, she went so far as to introduce a woman directly to him. Unintentionally, the woman fell in love with him at first sight. He is still handsome, and even if he doesn't like someone, he maintains basic politeness. What was just social politeness for him seemed to be taken seriously by her. I don't think he would say something he doesn't mean, but there's a chance my mother-in-law twisted his words to the woman. With her plan working perfectly, my mother-in-law's actions intensified. This happened when my daughter turned 3. Originally, my father-in-law had contacted us wanting to celebrate my daughter's birthday. But since my husband and I were not keen on having it at my in-laws, we asked to wait a bit longer so we could organize it on another day. My husband prepared for the granddaughter's birthday party. "You're off today, right? Come over with her." Impatient, perhaps he planned it as a surprise. Reluctant as we were to face my mother-in-law, it seemed unfair to refuse, so we took my daughter to my in-laws. However, when we arrived at my in-laws, my father-in-law was not there. At the house, for some reason, was my mother-in-law along with the woman she had suggested as a potential wife for my husband. I had a DNA test done on my son and granddaughter. They just didn't resemble each other much. I didn't want to doubt, but seeing the results, I thought it was clear. You've been cheating, haven't you? Passing off a child from another man as our son's. That's enough evidence to demand a divorce, isn't it? Then, my mother-in-law started urging my husband, you were being deceived, and that such a frivolous woman was not suitable to be your wife. The woman she had suggested as a bride was chiming in with my mother-in-law, clapping her hands and chanting for divorce. I was honestly astounded. Taking advantage of my silence, my mother-in-law and the candidate kept saying whatever they wanted. It was nothing but noise to me. It wasn't that I couldn't argue back, I was just too appalled to even bother. Gathering my wits, I took out a piece of paper and showed it to my mother-in-law. Sorry to burst your bubble, but it makes perfect sense that my daughter doesn't look like my husband. Moreover, she's not even my biological child. What? What I showed to my mother-in-law was a copy of the document proving that we had welcomed our daughter through a special adoption process. It was evidence of the adoption being finalized, and since she wouldn't understand if explained verbally, my husband and I had decided it was quicker to show her the proof, carrying a copy in case a situation like this ever arose. By the way, our daughter doesn't yet know this fact. She might have some suspicions, but we have no intention of hiding it from her. How dare you deceive us? I welcomed her thinking she was my granddaughter, and she turns out to be someone else's child. That's even worse than if you had cheated and had the child. She criticized me for welcoming a child whose biological parents were unknown. Then my husband shouted, "Silence. I explained everything, right? That we welcomed our daughter through adoption. How did it turn into my wife cheating and having the child? Are you out of your mind?" He lost his temper at my mother-in-law's cruel words. He quickly regained his composure and confessed something he had never told his mother. The reason we can't have biological children is my fault. I found out before we got married that I'm infertile. So, my wife is not to blame at all. He showed the copy of the test results from when he had found out. Then he revealed that he had asked me not to tell this fact to his mother. Realizing that the inability to have biological grandchildren was due to her own son, she was lost for words and hung her head. And it became clear that the only one who hadn't known or understood was my mother-in-law herself, leaving her struggling to process everything. In that moment, my husband declared we were cutting ties with her. No matter the misunderstanding, harassing psychologically and bullying a small child is not something adults do. My husband accused her, saying she had gone far beyond what could be forgiven. She was disowned by her beloved son, but her reaction was minimal, and she might not even understand what had happened. However, having no further reason to speak with my mother-in-law, we left her place. That night, we received a call from my father-in-law. He asked what had happened in his absence, so we told him everything, and he immediately came over to our house. He apologized to me and my daughter for his wife's rudeness. My daughter seemed not to fully understand, but said, if Grandpa says it's okay, then it's okay. I couldn't be as forgiving. All I could manage was to say I understood. The many actions and words from my mother-in-law had been like hell for me. A few days later, my mother-in-law, who was supposed to have been disowned by my husband, suddenly barged into our house, yelling. And for some reason, my husband's potential bride was also with her. Clearly, she hadn't understood my husband's declaration of estrangement, as expected. You must have made my son turn against me, right? My son is kind, he's just pitying you and protecting you. The potential bride echoed her, screaming like she was in charge of the ruckus. We are the saviors who have come to rescue our victim's son from the evil clutches of his wife. My mother-in-law shouted, see for yourself, and as she raised her hand towards my daughter who had peeked out from the room. My daughter flinched in shock, and I shielded her with my body. But the expected pain did not come. Looking up, I saw my husband had stepped between me and my mother-in-law, protecting us. From another room came a loud voice, my father-in-law, who had been hiding in another room, couldn't hold back any longer and burst out. "What did your granddaughter ever do to you? Accept reality for once." He was standing in front of my mother-in-law to protect me and my daughter. My mother-in-law, not expecting my father-in-law to be there, was taken aback, opening and closing her mouth in surprise. In fact, my father-in-law had been suspicious of the actions of my mother-in-law and the potential bride during his absence and had been keeping an eye on them. He had sensed they were up to no good and informed us. So, today's attack was expected. The only unexpected part was that my daughter, who had been told to stay in her room no matter what, was startled by my mother-in-law's voice and revealed herself. When my father-in-law sensed something was amiss, he wanted to see what my mother-in-law and the potential bride would do, so he hid in another room in our house. He hadn't planned on showing himself in front of his wife, but he couldn't stand by when she tried to hit my daughter. "Are you all blind? How could a family as united as ours ever fall apart? Wake up to the reality, why don't you?" And to top it all off, my father-in-law told his wife that he was aware of all her secrets and brought back the woman who was a candidate to be my husband's wife. A few days later, my father-in-law contacted me. It was about the secrets of my mother-in-law that he mentioned when he was leaving. According to him, he had sensed that his wife had been acting strangely for a while and probably had something to hide. But since it didn't seem to cause any particular trouble, he overlooked it. He appreciated the fact that she had kept the house running while he was often away for work. However, he couldn't make sense of the sudden appearance of the prospective bride and, after the incident that occurred during his absence, he had conducted an investigation into his wife's behavior through a detective agency. In the process, a malicious plan had come to light. My mother-in-law had been having an affair for years. My father-in-law, suspecting she was hiding something, had never imagined it would be an affair and was somewhat shocked. However, his shock turned to anger the moment he learned the identity of the sudden bride-to-be. The woman my mother-in-law had brought as a candidate for marriage was the daughter of her lover. My mother-in-law had no intention of divorcing my wealthy father-in-law, but she also did not want to leave her lover. She thought that if her lover's daughter married her son, family relations would start, making her affair easier to continue. It was all a plan orchestrated by my mother-in-law. Incidentally, the several candidates for marriage shown only in photos to my husband were women found on a matching site. It appears she had registered under my husband's name without his consent and pretended to be him. Furthermore, the daughter of my mother-in-law's lover, the marriage candidate, did not know her father was having an affair with my mother-in-law. She had met him thinking it was just a normal matchmaking attempt by her father and had fallen for the handsome man. The plan to have their children marry each other was also proposed by my mother-in-law to her lover. My father-in-law could no longer trust his wife's excuses for justifying her affair, nor could he believe that she didn't want a divorce only because of his wealth, and he decided to divorce. He also mentioned that having such an adult around was not good for my daughter's education. My father-in-law was firm in his decision, and it seemed that no matter how much his wife begged and apologized, he would not forgive her. Ever since I got married, my mother-in-law, who was always aggressive towards me, suddenly became meek and sought my help. "My husband adored you and your daughter, right? If you guys persuade him, I think he will reconsider," she pleaded, wanting me to somehow stop my father-in-law from divorcing her. But after all the torment she put me and my daughter through, I owed her no favors. I am not that kind-hearted, nor am I that capable. "Don't joke with me. My husband, daughter, and I have all been hurt by what you've done. Shouldn't there be something you want to say before asking for favors?" That was truly how I felt, even if she apologized now. But my mother-in-law resorted to betrayal. "Did I do something wrong? Sure, I feel a bit sorry for having an affair while my husband was around, but wasn't the issue with the adoption due to your lack of explanation? I'm not to blame here." Hearing this, my husband threw her out without a word. Then he vehemently chased her away. My father-in-law had initially given his wife some time to find another place to live, but after hearing her story, he revoked this grace period, submitted the divorce papers immediately, and demanded alimony from both his wife and her lover. The lover's situation also became a disaster as he was confronted by his wife due to the various rumors and the alimony notice he received, causing a huge scandal. My mother-in-law's lover, who was married into a moderately wealthy family through his wife, faced a huge uproar for bringing shame to them. Afterwards, he was demanded a significant amount in alimony and ended up being divorced. As for the prospective bride my mother-in-law had arranged, she continued to push forward with her plans to marry my husband, unaffected by her parents' predicaments. That led us to obtain a restraining order against her after she approached our daughter at the park. My mother-in-law, ousted from the family home upon the divorce, began working to pay off the alimony. The alimony owed to her husband was covered by the division of their assets. But the amount demanded by her lover's wife was far beyond what she could afford from the divorce settlement. She began living alone for the first time in her life, in an old apartment with thin walls where she could hear everything from the neighbors. At work, she's constantly making mistakes and getting scolded. She's turned into the kind of person she used to mock me, calling her useless and slow. For the first time in her life, over half a century, she started living a life filled with misery. Our family has grown even closer through this. My daughter is now always laughing and showing interest in various things. Right now, I'm just so excited to see how she grows. My former father-in-law also regularly checks in on us and has become a wonderful grandfather, absolutely smitten with his granddaughter.